We are rocket propelling into a new society, a new paradigm for humanity. I think much of the world isn't ready for what's coming. This year, January of 2024, over 2,700 AI researchers predicted the full automation of all jobs. In 2021, I sold my human creative writing agency, and in 2023, I started working full-time in AI. This is the future. Not just of knowledge work, white-collar jobs, but automation will even touch the skilled trades. What's coming will reshape how we live, how we work, how we interact with each other, and bring about abundance unlike anything else. In a moment, anything we ever wanted. Just imagine anything you want created, delivered to you, anything you're in need of, made or generated by robots in minutes. This will reinvent the entire workforce, how we exchange goods and services. And what's coming with automation demands that we build a new economy. Today I want to go over a unique idea called the Universal Productivity Dividend. Can this actually be a solution for our automated future? First of all, what is a universal productivity dividend? It's a proposal for an economic policy that takes all the wealth and revenue generated by automated profits and redistributes it back to the people. It's a dividend that is paid out to every citizen, funded by the productivity gains from automation. Now, as always, the question is, just like the questions around universal basic income, which could lead us into universal high income, that latter, starting with UBI, is something that I think we will actually see in 2030 and beyond, when the world is forced to build a new society and a new way of handling currency in an economy not driven by labor. Now, that doesn't mean we won't work. That doesn't mean we won't be able to exercise our passions. In fact, those things probably got more important than ever, because it's our passions and what we love doing that will give us meaning in this coming era. But going back to the pitfall that universal productivity dividends, universal basic income, universal high income, the pitfall and the big danger that threads through anything given universally out to citizens on a mass scale is the level of control, the potential danger of a one world order, and that coming from a communist, evil, dictatorship-like government. That's a real problem. I don't want to be naive and skip over that. And that is something I'm thinking of every time I research this topic. But here's another thought. What if it worked? What if it could be done in a way where we were able to free people up from manual labor? When we look at the Industrial Revolution and what it produced, mass babysitting, aka public school, which doesn't really prepare you for the real world, humans sitting at desks for 8-10 hours a day. What if automation freed us up so we could deploy agents to work on our behalf, deploy the robots to do all this menial labor, and get back to being a human being? I don't think that's so bad. All right, so how would we fund a dividend like UPD, the Universal Productivity Dividend? 3 ways. First, through automation taxes, next through data usage fees, and then thirdly, robot licensing. Automation taxes could be aligned with the productivity gains that companies get from implementing AI systems over people. There's going to be a lot of productivity, but the profits and the gains from that productivity will just go back to that big corporation. However, the idea of high taxes is scary, especially to a free people. So we can't rely only on taxes to make this happen. With data usage fees, since data fuels artificial intelligence, companies would pay for the commercial use of consumer data. And then in robot licensing, companies would pay fees to deploy robots and AI systems. If you've ever watched Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams, there was this idea of a family purchasing a humanoid and then putting that humanoid out in the workforce on their behalf. And there was a scene in Bicentennial Man when an executive asks the humanoid, aka Robin Williams, how much money can you generate? And Robin Williams alluded to the fact that he could make more than that executive's annual salary in a matter of days. And that executive had nothing to say. But this is a potential likely scenario. We could deploy robots on our behalf. In fact, Figure 01 is already thinking this way. Brett Adcock, the founder of that humanoid company, has said this in several interviews. We can actually put these robots to work for us in the workforce. Now, how would we manage a universal productivity dividend? This is where it gets kind of hairy, because when you give something over to the government, it doesn't usually go that well. I mean, just look at the history of governments and their policies and what they've successfully implemented. So a national UPD fund managed by the government, well, we'd have to have some strict regulations around honesty to make sure that this actually gets back to the people. And the idea of UBI, UHI, and even Universal Productivity Dividends is that it is universal and unconditional, and that's when it works. In 2023, the US spent over $1 trillion on welfare programs, but because of the red tape and the nature of these programs, they really serve as a band-aid and not empowerment to a person, giving them the backing and the support they really need to do better with their life. Pilot programs and studies of UBI have shown that it can work. And it can empower people to actually make a better life for themselves, more than any welfare program has ever empowered someone to do. The idea of a universal productivity dividend is definitely interesting, because if we link this to national productivity metrics of how much automation is improving and adding to economic gains, well, as automation increases, the dividend could increase. It's a direct correlation. Going all the way back to the 1700s and this idea of agrarian justice, where we are entitled to the stewardship of the earth, having an initial layer of financial security actually allows people to explore their passions more. And it's when we explore our passions, find our meaning, that we can really add back to the world. We can use our God-given gifts for beautiful things, but when we don't have that room and we're under stress and pressure, it's really hard to be able to do that. Here's something interesting. The idea of a universal productivity dividend is completely novel, and it's actually something that ChatGPT came up with when it was asked to provide a novel solution to the crisis of zero jobs left due to work automation. Whenever I asked O1 with reasoning, what are the potential problems of a universal productivity dividend? It gave me a list of 14 massive problems with subpoints below each of those problems. It said we're going to have funding challenges, lots of tax evasion by corporations, which is already happening, the problem of a disincentive to work, a lot of fraud and abuse in the administrative realm, no feasibility in the political realm, misalignment of incentives, inflation, data concerns, surveillance risks, unintended economic consequences, the rise of a black market, and even long-term degradation to the environment. Now, is all this true? I think it's all in how you manage the rollout of something like UBI, UPD. So I wouldn't necessarily agree. But when I did ask O1, what are the chances of being able to successfully roll out a universal productivity dividend by 2030, it gave me a less than 1% chance. But then it talked about individual governments on a much smaller scale exploring this as a rollout. And when I asked it for an alternate idea, it talked about a better way to roll out UBI. I think that with the breakthrough of level 2 reasoning now inside of OpenAI's products, we can literally task ChatGPT with something like, help us build this new world economy, and actually take these answers, apply them with our own judgment, and use them to help us shape and prepare for what's coming. This is a great use of reasoning now built within ChatGPT. I'm going to keep exploring this topic, how to avoid the pitfall of a nefarious one world government that would seek to have total control, which is a very real and dangerous side effect of where we are headed. I still believe there's time to completely avoid that problem, but we on a grassroots level need to be aware and aligned and informed, and that's what you're doing right now. So kudos to you. I'd love to hear from you in the comments on this topic. What do you think of a universal productivity dividend? I will have more thoughts on UBI in more videos to come. And like I said, I do believe this is something we will see instituted on a national, if not global level within the next decade, because we honestly have no choice but to implement something like this to avoid mass homelessness from the automation of much of human labor. Get ready, a new paradigm is coming. Be sure to hit subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments, I'll see you there, and as always, I'll see you down the next rabbit hole.